Let me introduce you to one of the proud supporters of From the Hawkeye of the Storm, Iowa floor covering down in Bondurant. Now, for the last year and a half, you've heard me talk about this great company in the heart of central Iowa. They've got their tough core, click together, 4.5 millimeter waterproof vinyl flooring, great for you DIYers out there. But even if you're just a contractor or you need a different type of flooring, they've got you covered, whether it be tile showers, carpet. Give Iowa Floor Covering a chance to serve you better and serve your flooring needs. Visit them online at iowafloorcovering.com. That's iowafloorcovering.com, or you can give them a call at 515-379-7000. That's 515-379-7000. Thank you to Iowa Floor Covering in Bondurant. Pleased to be joined by none other than Coach Don Patterson here in Hawkeye Nation as we count down the days now to the most difficult game on paper of the entire season, the entire 2024 Iowa football campaign. Coach, you're looking good. You're looking blue, but not in a bad way. Is that your golf shirt that you're wearing on the show today? I'm guessing this is a Finkbein shirt, correct?
This shirt has been known to reside at Finkbein from time to time. Yes.
So I got to ask you before we get into the nitty-gritty of this showdown between the Hawkeyes and the Buckeyes. It's never easy to go to the shoe. So many reasons why. We'll get into it. But, Don, we got a bye week 4 weeks into the season. It seems a little early. There were a couple teams that had bye weeks earlier, but Iowa gets 2 this year. And so with that being said, that you have an opportunity to do some TV work during bye weeks. So tell us a little bit about what your bye week was like.
Well, we were blessed with a wonderful game. It was Youngstown State at Missouri State, and the winning touchdown was scored in the last few seconds of the game. So they were already in field goal range. Missouri State did win, but it was well played on both sides. The quarterback from Missouri State started off at Minnesota, and I found myself thinking, he's better than anybody Minnesota's got right now, so too bad they let him leave. Excellent player.
What is his name, Don?
Oh, gosh, I forget after I do a game. Jacob Clark, I believe it was. Jacob Clark.
Wasn't Iowa in on him?
Probably so. He was pretty highly credentialed coming out of high school. He's from Rockwall, Texas, which is not far from Dallas. I've been to his high school many times. But he's an excellent player. He's throwing for more than 300 a game right now. He's thrown a lot of touchdowns, hardly any interceptions. Actually, was an above average runner. He played a hell of a game. He really did.
Yeah, Jacob Clark was recruited, offered by Iowa. In fact, his Power 5 offers were Minnesota, Cal, Iowa, Purdue, and let's see, Syracuse. No, there are actually a few more. Syracuse, TCU, Wazoo. I remember when he entered the portal, Don, he was not a big name in the portal, but I remember, hearing Iowa was looking for a quarterback at the time, and you're like, okay, here's a guy that has connections to Iowa, and Iowa recruited in the past, and so I doubt there were any. I mean, hey, he ended up at a FCS school. Speaking of FCS, how about Raylan Sharp the other day, the speedster out of Missouri State from a year ago, who was an FCS All-American? Iowa tried to get him to come to Iowa. He ends up going to Fresno State. He had a huge game for the Bulldogs this past week, over 10 receptions and I believe $150 through the air for the 5'9" former FCS All-American receiver. Don, you love to preach size is overrated, especially as it relates to receiver play, and Sharp is having a nice campaign early for the Bulldogs.
I'm happy to hear that. Coach Fry's the one that first said it. You never weigh or measure a man when he crosses the goal line.
Absolutely. So here's how it's going to work tonight, folks. We've got at least the next hour and a half with Coach Patterson. We're going to be talking about this massive showdown in Columbus, and I'm going to be hesitant with what I say, or at least cautious with what I say, because I've been burned before when I've said what I say. I'm not always optimistic, Don, but I feel pretty good going into this game. Not saying I'm predicting an Iowa win, but let me just start with this, and I think this is a pretty modest prediction. I don't think we're going to see a result like we saw 2 years ago when Iowa went to Columbus. Maybe we can start there, Don. That was a game in which Iowa's defense did everything it could, especially early, but without any semblance of an offense. Eventually, the dam broke, and the route was on. I don't think we're going to see that, primarily because I think Iowa's got a better play caller in place and certainly a better run game. Who knows how effective it will be against a real test in Ohio State. But would you agree with that statement, that prediction, that this is not going to look like 2022?
Yeah. I'd be very surprised if that happens. Now, the only game I've really watched closely was the Michigan State game. The 3 non-conference games were not very difficult, let's say, to be kind. So they really weren't tested at all then. And then the other day when they played last Saturday night, the Michigan State coach commented after the game. Here's what he said. He said, "We were not overwhelmed tonight. We just made too many mistakes, too many self-inflicted wounds. And that's why we lost in the way that we did. It was a one-sided game, of course. But truthfully, Michigan State had great chances, any number of chances to make it a really tight game for a long time, and they simply didn't get it done. They played a pretty sloppy game, and they paid for it. Having said that, Ohio State dominated in all kinds of areas. Just to give you an idea, Ohio State versus Michigan State, of the top 15 parameters that relate to winning, they won 14 of them. And you might say, well, that means Michigan State won 1. No, that was a tie. So they were 0 for 15. In some cases, it was close, but in other cases, not so close. They were outgained 2-1 on total offense. Ohio State was +2 on turnovers. Good luck overcoming that. Ohio State was very efficient in the red zone, 5 for 5, and I believe they were all touchdowns, as I recall. Michigan State, on the other hand, was 1 out of 3 in the red zone, and that cost them dearly. Did you see the game, Corey, or have you seen the condensed version?
Yep, I watched it. Watched the game on Peacock.
Well, with your permission, I'm going to refer to my notes a little bit here just to be sure I get everything in chronological order.
Sure.
They started the game. Ohio State, it seemed like a big part of their initial plan was to run a lot of horizontal passes away from a fake and back. So if you can envision, they're faking run left and throwing a quick throw, a high percentage throw into the opposite flat. And they had very modest success doing it. Maybe their thought was that we're going to slow down their pursuit early on. So our initial action is always going to be incorrect. That's a good way to slow down pursuit, of course. But they had modest results doing it. Anyway, the way the game went, they had a field goal early. They stalled out and kicked a field goal. And as you know, Michigan State comes back down the field, and now they got 4th and 1 on the plus 20-yard line. They passed up a field goal, even though it was a chip shot. In today's modern age, a chip shot of 38 yards. And all they came up with was a sneak, and they gained absolutely nothing on the sneak. So I really question that strategy. If you're down 3-0, and they're playing at home, of course, why wouldn't you at least? I know the mindset might have been we gotta be really bold with our decision making, but I would say when you're playing the number 3 team in the country, just get on the board and tie them up again, because you haven't proven to me that you're very good in short yardage anyway. So that caused them. Could have had a tie game at that point, did not. Other observations early on: the backs run hard, as you know. They're good backs. They don't only run hard; they even pass protect well. They're tough guys, strong runners. The receivers are very slippery, especially 2 of them, as you know. And one priority, I'm sure we've worked a lot to improve our tackling. I'm sure it's been emphasized. We cannot afford to miss tackles as we did against recent opponents.
And some of, let me just add, a couple of Iowa's better players missed multiple tackles in that game.
That's true. That's true. So it wasn't just our last game against Minnesota. I go back to Troy also. We missed some tackles there. So we got to tackle well. I'm sure they practiced a lot just with fundamental tackling for them. And I think that's another reason, Corey, you're more likely to see a lot of zone coverage out of us. 2 reasons. You got to be able to eliminate the big plays. And I think in defending the run game, that's our best chance, is to have 11 sets of eyes toward the ball and be able to maintain leverage on the ball and never give a back a 2-way go. In other words, we got one guy with inside leverage, another guy with outside leverage. We're going to make a Buckeye sandwich out of that ball carrier with a little bit of luck. But that's one reason we'll play more zone. The other reason is obvious. If we play a lot of man, we're really at risk for individual matchups. Abuka's really good. The freshman plays like he's a senior right now.
Jeremiah Smith's the best player on that team. I mean, I
Jeremiah
know
Smith he's a phenom.
he is.
He really is. So we have our hands full with those guys. And again, we don't want to get isolated one-on-one with those receivers. Or if so, it's simply that we're in off coverage and it's still zone defense, which means we still have good run support. So that comes to mind. The way the game goes along, how about this for a setup? This is a play that went in Ohio State's favor. And I did read somewhere on social media where it really was a bad call. I'd be inclined to agree based on what I saw. Ohio State is 2nd and goal at the 3-yard line. Plus 3-yard line, they run a whip route to Abuka. The ball is ruled incomplete. You remember the play, Corey? This is in the first half. Could have easily been ruled as a fumble, but they said he never possessed it, so it was incomplete. Incidentally, that ball in the end zone was recovered by Michigan State. But the officials' ruling of it being an incomplete pass did hold up. That was without a doubt in favor of Ohio State, because 2 plays later they scored a touchdown. Incidentally, on 3rd and goal, 1 play later, the ball was dropped by Michigan State in the end zone. Easy play. That's why they play defense and they can't catch, right? You've heard that old adage. So that's another lost opportunity on consecutive plays. And finally, on 4th and goal, they do throw a touchdown pass. That's 10-0. My next comment I mentioned is OSU looks vulnerable on defense. I felt that way. I felt that way in some other weeks that I've seen them in places. And it was asked this way by Pat Hardy, Coach, let's just talk about the front seven. Am I wrong to say the front seven is nothing special? Maybe certainly average or even a little above average compared to the conference, but they're not great in the front seven. And I said, I can see why you might say that because I have seen teams move the ball on them. You might recall Marshall moved the ball on them pretty effectively, especially in the first half. So whatever the case might be, I do think we have a chance to run the ball. Let's face it, we have to be able to because if we have to play without a running game, we're in a huge dark and evil place. You know, we don't want that to happen. We'll hope that we're running the ball against zone defense so that the box is not so heavy. But at some point in time, and I say they're going to do this because they did it against Michigan State in the second half, at some point in time, they said, you know what? We're just going to go ahead and outnumber you, and we're going to play man, and we're going to dare you to throw. If we're moving the ball effectively, that's what they're going to do. They're going to turn to that, and they won't wait around too long to do it because they don't want Caleb Johnson to be running up and down the field, not to mention Patterson. So if they have to load the box, they'll do it. And they'll do it with some confidence because I'm sure they feel like they'll match up just fine. And at that point, I would mention it would behoove us to have, we don't have to just call them willy-nilly, but we have to have them available. And you've heard me talk before about man beaters. We have to have some good plays designed, not just to defeat man coverage, but to scare them out of man coverage. Because if we can't get them out of it, once they're in it, then why would they bother to change? Now, one other comment, though, which you'll find interesting, and this will probably make some sense to you, Corey. If you play man coverage, of course, if you load the box, typically it's man free. The free safety will be very deep. You can't even see him on the television screen a lot of the time. He's 15, 18, even maybe 20 yards deep. And you might recall a lot of Caleb's long runs, some of them have actually been against a heavy front. But with the man coverage, of course, you can run off the outside defenders with your wide receivers. They don't even really have to block them. They can just run them away from where the ball is going. And, of course, the only guy that has a good shot at a running back in the open field is the free safety. Once we do clear that front, then they're running out of people in a short amount of time. And I like Caleb's chances against the free safety, even though he's an outstanding player. I believe. Now, which safety does he play? I'm talking about the guy from Alabama. And I don't have his name right in front of me, but I got it written down. Bear with me. Caleb Downs. He's either a strong or free safety. I'm not sure which, but he was the SEC Freshman of the Year last year. He's transferred from Alabama. He's a big hitter. I don't know that he's a sure tackler. He simply hadn't had that many opportunities to tackle. But I suspect he might be the free safety. Maybe he's this strong. I didn't really notice. Haven't had a chance to go back and look at it. But even if it is Caleb Downs, it's still not easy to get an athlete like Caleb down in the open field. It's kind of nice if you have help from another defender. And as you already know, Corey, a lot of guys have been surprised with Caleb's speed, deceptive stride length, and it means he's a little faster than what he appears to be. And some guys are taking poor angles, as you know. And that's how we end up with big plays sometimes. So even if they are loading the box, let's face it, just because they put in one more tackler than we have blockers, the tackler still has to find a way to get to the ball. And he's got to sort through our players and his players sometimes to get there. It depends on where the ball's hitting, of course. But the bottom line, that doesn't guarantee that you're going to eliminate explosive plays in the run game. It does give you a much better chance to hold the rushing game to +1, +2, +3. You should eliminate a lot of +6s, 7s, and 8s with that extra tackler. And you should discourage a lot of run plays, of course, because you're kind of daring another team to throw. And if they're very capable with their pass offense, they're happy to oblige. We used to love to play teams that would play man coverage because, as you know, we had a history of being able to get to them. But you have to have a lot of man beaters to be able to do it. You don't want to run out of plays. that'll give you the kind of advantage you need. I've been doing a lot of talking, Corey. I'm sure you've got questions.
Well, I do want to address, before we get to our first caller, we've got Doug, who was here bright and early. I want to address a comment that was made by Tim Lester during his media availability last week, and that is regarding deep shots. The question was posed, there's an effort to get the ball downfield more. That's something you and I talked about on the post-game show after Minnesota. Now, they ran the ball really proficiently in the second half and outscored Minnesota 24-0. By the way, we can talk about the Gophers. They are a one-half team, right? I mean, a miserable second half against Iowa, first half against Michigan, and yet if you pair the first half against Iowa, second half against Michigan, they're one of the best teams in the country right now if you look at the performances of those two halves. But I digress. Tim Lester on deep shots versus Minnesota, and I quote, he said, "We're definitely still developing it. Shoot, I had a couple of really good ones last weekend that we didn't call because of how the game was playing out. I wanted to call it multiple times. I did bring it up in a group forum. I got voted down a couple times." First of all, I want to say this. I'm happy he said that, because to me, it shows that he's comfortable. He's comfortable speaking on behalf of his offense. And at least to this point, he's comfortable in his own skin. Now, I don't know how Kirk feels about those comments. If you were the head coach, which you were the head coach of a really successful FCS program for a number of years, Don, would you be okay with your offensive coordinator basically telling the public that he had an idea and the powers that be shot it down during a game?
Not really, to be honest with you. Now, we don't know exactly what the discussion looked like. I do think if there were coaches that were not excited about a particular play, they might have had a good reason. I'll give you an example. Maybe that particular play that Tim's talking about involves a lot of time on the clock. And so an obvious response from an O-line coach might be, "Coach, I don't know that we can buy you that much time." Might have been a comment like that. Or maybe the receiver coach simply said, "On paper it looks good, but I don't know if we have anybody that can separate from these particular corners. I don't know that we have anybody. We can draw it up. It looks good on the board, but we still have to ask a player to be able to execute it and do it." So it could have been comments along that line. We don't know exactly how the comment went. But I think one good aspect of it, now don't misunderstand, Corey, we'd have those kind of discussions about whether or not to run a particular play. And I'm talking about before the game, during the week. And the verdict might be, "That's a great concept, but let's save it for next weekend because we can buy more time against next week's pass rushers rather than this week." Something along those lines. Maybe the next game is, of course, in our case, I'm trying to think of who the next game even is. I can't remember. Where do we go next week? Washington. Yeah. Well, that's another. Let's face it, they're all must win. That's the mindset of the coaches and players.
So we got to win them all. I want to just to be clear, you're telling me that if you were the head coach, you would not approve of your coordinator going before the media and saying he got voted down on a couple of deep calls that he wanted to make during a game?
Well, I don't see it as that big a deal. I am glad that Tim is able to speak honestly and openly with the press. But, I would like to think if it hadn't been discussed already, it might come up now. Let's just spend a few minutes here talking about things I would prefer that you not share with the media. Maybe Kirk does that, maybe not. I don't know. But
here's the thing. Here's the big, I don't want to call it a misnomer, but the elephant in the room that has been around this program and this offense for so long. And of course, it's been Brian Ferentz's offense for a long time, but a lot of people would say it's been Kirk Ferentz's offense for 24, 25 years. I know you don't totally buy into that notion, Don, but I think some fans, when they hear something like that, in a way it's refreshing because they're like, aha, we have a coordinator that wants to do it, but then the other part of them is upset because it seems like Kirk is holding that coordinator back. Now, I don't want to read this quote and act like there was context to this. I can't read the entire context of the comments, but basically right. Lester went on to say that, we were running the ball well and hey, why waste them? So I think there's that too. I do think Hawkeye fans there were mixed emotions when they heard that statement. But hey, they outscored them by 24. I defended Kirk. If Kirk's the one who voted those plays down during the game, I'm fine with that given the circumstances. What I don't want, Don, is I don't want him to vote those down in moments against Ohio State. I like an offensive coordinator who's going to be aggressive and wants to put the nail in the coffin. And I also appreciate a head coach like Kirk who might be able to kind of give and take and compliment his OC by saying, all right, Tim, but let's just hold back a little bit. We got this. We'll just run the ball down their throats, win this game. I just want Kirk to be able to, hopefully, in a big game like Ohio State, I think they're going to have to connect on a deep shot or two. I don't think they're going to be able to do what they did against Minnesota second half and beat Ohio State. I think they have to get the ball downfield at some point. I don't care how many yards they run for on the ground. I think they're going to have to score points to beat this team, and I just hope in this game especially, Kirk is willing to give Tim a little bit of the benefit of the doubt on bigger shot plays.
Yeah, we don't know the context of the conversation that Tim's referring to. Did you get the impression, Corey, this was a discussion during the game?
Well, like I said, the quote, and I tried to get as much context as possible here. He said, I had a couple of really good ones last weekend that we didn't call because of how the game was playing out. I wanted to call it multiple times. I did bring it up in a group forum. I got voted down a couple times. So he preceded that statement about getting voted down by saying it was because of how the game was playing out. That would tell me that it was a mid-game thing. Maybe it was a halftime. Maybe it was a halftime thing, Don. I don't know, but they were behind at halftime 14-7.
Well, and the way the first half played out, there was no guarantee that we were gonna thrash them in the second half.
Right. Exactly.
The numbers were very even. I would assume. I can't remember what the halftime stats were, but it was fairly even. Of course, they had the lead and all that, as you know.
Give us an idea of the logistics of that. Give us the idea of the logistics of that. When he says, if assuming that, and I know we're kind of reading into this, but assuming that this group forum in which Tim Lester was shot down on a play or two, I'm assuming he's talking to Kirk Ferentz via the headset, of course, because Coach Lester's up in the box, Kirk's down on the sidelines. When he says, I brought it up in a group forum, how much conversation is being had, not just between the OC and the head coach, but also other coaches regarding big play calls? Like when he says group forum, what do you take that to mean?
Well, the odds are, we don't know, the way the phones are set up. I believe they're still set up the same way. Kirk is either on the offensive or defensive line. He can switch back and forth, of course. But typically, the unit that's on the field, it would be logical for you to assume that Kirk is on the phone with those coaches that are controlling players at that moment on the field, right? If we're playing defense, he's probably on the defensive line. Now, he can, of course, flip back and forth. But having said that, obviously, just for the sake of argument, it's 3rd and long for Minnesota, and we're anticipating that they're going to fail on 3rd and long, and we're going to have the ball. And obviously, Kirk might switch over to the offensive line before they've even run the play on 3rd down to talk about what we're going to be doing with the next series. It could happen that way. Jim might simply say, here's what I want to go with. We discussed it during the week. We've run it. Our guys know how to execute. I think now's a good time to call it. Any of 3 people come to mind for me that could vote that down to some degree or another. Obviously, the head coach can nix the whole idea, which is one thumbs down on his part. Then beyond that, the 2 that come to mind for me in the passing game would be the receiver coach and the O-line coach. Not quite so much the tight end coach or the backfield coach, although with a little bit of luck, of course, tight ends and backs are also out as receivers. But typically, when you talk about a play that takes a long time, of course, the way our offense is, maybe that play that took a long time was designed for the tight end. We don't know. But the point is, as you were saying, you're glad to hear Tim thinking about finding ways to make a big play. And I think it's healthy for them to discuss it. Let's face it, who's got a better handle on our pass protection, the O-line coach or the offensive coordinator? I'd give the edge to the O-line coach because he's much better, much more aware at that moment of how his players are performing and whether or not they're a little bit gassed or maybe there's a guy in the lineup that Tim's not even aware is in for this next series, a different offensive lineman. All kinds of reasons might give you reason to value the input from that O-line coach. If it relates to pass protection, you better listen to the O-line coach.
I think overall my takeaways from Tim's comments, first of all, like what I led with here, I wonder if maybe there's some comments after that press conference like, okay, we need to be careful with what we say because we don't want to pit coaches against one another. And I don't think Tim was at all trying to do that. I think
it sounds to me like it was a healthy discussion. Yeah. Let's face it, Tim could have run the play against the wishes of a couple of other assistants. He chose not to do that. He valued their input, and in the end, he decided, okay, maybe you're right. Maybe that's a risk we don't need to take. And obviously, as the second half played out, it became more and more obvious. We just need to keep pushing the line of scrimmage, creating seams to run through, and eating up valuable clock in the process.
And my overall takeaways are, I'm just happy that he's confirmed. He called them really good plays. He's confident about these plays. That tells me they were plays specific to the game. You and I have talked about game planning, and right. they have to be specific towards a team based on the team's tendencies they've shown on tape, etc. As Aiden brings up in the chat, they've had a bye week to prepare. So I agree with this statement. Need to be aggressive regardless of the bye. They got to be aggressive to beat a team like Ohio State. You just can't bang your head against a wall like they've tried to so many times against even the likes of Wisconsin and Michigan State, etc. over the years and lost. They got to be able to throw the ball down the field even with a healthy run game. Now, stopping big plays is going to be big. I mean, we saw Jeremiah Smith make a couple of unbelievable one-handed catches. You mentioned Ibuka, Trevion Henderson. They're just really deep. Also, their running back usage, they use a lot of guys. It's not like they really don't have a guy that I think is much of a Heisman candidate because they use so many players. And I hope, we'll see, but I hope Iowa's going to be at least 3 deep at running back for this game. If LaShawn isn't playing, you hope that you got Kamari back. You've got a healthy Jazz and a healthy Caleb, because at some point, I don't think Caleb's going to be able to continue the 25 to 30 carries every single game. Now, most games he may be able to, Don, but would you agree there's going to be times where he's going to need some wind and someone's going to have to step up the way Jazz Patterson did up in Minneapolis?
Yeah. I don't know the forecast for Columbus on Saturday, but obviously a 3:30 kick their time, I guess, right?
Right.
2:30 our time. There's going to be a lot of sunlight out there. If it's a typical day, it's going to be pretty warm on the turf.
All right, let's go to our first caller of the day. We've got our guy Doug on hold. Doug, welcome to the show.
Hey, how you guys doing?
Doing good, Doug. How are you?
That's good. I'm good. Yeah. As I've mentioned to you before, Corey, how much I love Iowa men's basketball. But my favorite Iowa Hawkeye athlete of all times is Tim Dwight, by far. Tim Dwight. I wish you talk about a little wide receiver that could. Oh, he flew. I mean, he was amazing. I'm going to ask Coach one question, please. People in chat, you don't get mad about to Don about conference realignment, because there's a lot of drama with the Pac-12 and Mountain West, and North Texas is kind of being looked at. What are your feelings about conference realignment in North Texas going to one of those conferences? Because I know that you and Coach Fry came from there. You probably dreamt of going to the Pac-12 back in those days, but what are your feelings about that?
I just think in general, I don't know what we're going to do. Just for the sake of argument, what if the cost of energy goes up even more in the coming years? What's it going to cost to fly a team halfway across the country? We're just spending a lot of money on travel. And of course, we need to not lose sight of the fact we're talking about a lot of different sports. It's not just football and basketball. It's any number of sports. So at some point, the travel just is really difficult to deal with. And schools, if you have a Big Ten budget, not such a problem. But what about the North Texas budget? It's not in the same category. So I just wonder where we're headed. I think that's the great argument for being regional with your conference alignment. I know the Big Ten's now coast to coast, but let's face it, if you're not a Power 4 conference, you better think long and hard about including too many teams that are way out in left field somewhere geographically, because it's going to cost a lot of money to get all that travel.
Yeah.
Real quick, Doug, you are aware we can't see you, right?
You can't see me?
No, your screen is totally black.
Oh, it's not on my end.
Are you seeing him, Coach?
No.
Oh,
No.
it's all right.
Okay.
I don't know what I didn't do or did do.
I saw you earlier, but you're gone here. So, anyways, I just wanted to let you know.
Oh, okay.
I see the logo.
Okay. Well, not that anyone needs to see me. Do you see me now?
Well, no, you're totally black. Let me just say this real quick.
That's all right.
As it relates to conference realignment, Don, there's just too much money in the Big Ten, the SEC, to where it doesn't really matter. I don't know that the cost of it. I mean, I don't know. I'm no conference auditor, but I would have to think that the cost of travel and utilities and all these things, it's not even a drop in the bucket for the big conferences. Now, I have no doubt what you said about the smaller conferences, maybe even the new look Pac-12, whatever that ends up being, / Mountain West or the AAC and those schools, those are things maybe you have to consider, maybe. But I would just have to think there's too much money in the big conferences. And I'd never really batted an eye when the Big Ten Conference looked at adding 4 teams out west, because these TV deals are just unprecedented. And the money going to these universities they're in.
Yeah, there are really only 2 conferences that are in position to benefit from that type of thing. Of course, Big Ten, SEC. Those are the 2 conferences that truly benefit the most.
Okay, and then my other question would be about scripted plays, because you talked about game plans and stuff. How do you just script the first half, the beginning of the second half? What plays do you know are going to be ran? Do you know if you're going to take shots down the field before, like in pregame? Do you plan that out, or I guess my question is how much do you know what plays you'll run before the game, and what plays are scripted?
Well, I remember how I used to do it when I became a head coach. I decided you'll laugh, but it's the truth. You've seen the typical call sheet, right? You've seen that on television.
Yeah.
And in the case of the NFL, and even in college, some of them are big. They're maybe 18 inches wide and 12 inches tall or even more. And of course, they're 2-sided. And the only thing that ever always bothered me about a 2-sided call sheet, it seemed like in so many cases, you're always on the wrong side. Not that it's a big deal. You flip it over, but it takes you a split second to realize you're on the wrong side. And of course, with every second matters when you're getting a play into the game. It's a little bit easier now because you don't have to signal plays anymore. That does help. But the bottom line, it was my idea. I took the same size call sheet, if you will, but I made it into a book. So when I folded it into a book, I had a front page, I had 2 inside pages, and then I had a back page, right?
Yeah.
Well, the inside pages, one page was dedicated strictly to run, the other side dedicated to pass. And of course, you had the calls from the left side of the field on one column, just as the football field lays out. Those are on the left side of that page. And then on the right side would be plays that were more appropriate for the right hash mark or the right side of the field. I hope that makes sense. And then from there, I would underline the plays that I liked the best. That might eliminate half the plays right there. But you got to have more plays available. It's just a start point. Maybe they show up and play a different defense than what you expected. So maybe now that those plays underlined are not so good because they've changed up their defense.
Yeah, you were prepared. My last question is for Iowa going forward with Caleb Johnson, and I hope he gets to 2,000 yards, but he needs about 1,300 more in the next 8 games. But it'd be nice to see us get it back to 2,000 yards. But I guess a double question. How many carries do you think he should be at per game? And what should our run pass? I know that they always talk about 50-50. Is that realistic, that 50% pass, 50% run? But how many carries do you think Caleb should get a game? and how about like what percentage pass to run?
Well, I would say this in general. I'd rather be a little more than 50% run than less than 50% run. Nothing wrong with being 60-40. If you're 60-40, obviously they're thinking about defending the run. I'm saying 60% run. And of course, that helps to set up your play action pass. So 60-40 is a pretty good ratio. If you think about it, let's say there's 70 plays in a game. Well, that'd be 42 runs and 28 passes, right? So that's a pretty good balance. I say balance in terms of number of plays at 60-40. But let's face it, if you have 42 runs and 28 passes, isn't it entirely possible that you might have yardage that's even more balanced than that 60-40 ratio? Let's face it, if you're not gaining more per snap in the passing game, then maybe you should think more about running the ball than passing it. If you're not getting good results, because as Darrell Roy famously said, when you throw a ball, one of three things happens and two of them are bad. Of course, that's back in the days where people couldn't throw for more than 50%. But the bottom line, of course, you don't want to be too heavy on pass. I actually keep track of the team with the fewest pass attempts to see what their winning percentage is. And just, it won't shock you to hear this, but that gives you a better winning percentage than the team with the most passing yardage. That gives you a better winning percentage than the team with the most pass completions. Those numbers are not as good. The team with the fewer passing attempts wins more often than the one with the most passing yardage or the most pass completions. And obviously, the most pass attempts won't get you any further down the road than the other two.
ZJ with the comment, I should say, has Patterson moved up to number 2 on their RB depth chart. He is listed as the number 2, along with Kamari Moulton, and Kamari did not play against Minnesota, but it sounds like he was dealing with concussion protocol. So we'll see. We'll see if he's back. And I don't know that Jazz has done anything to cement himself as the number 2. And frankly, this is a game I could see Iowa playing 3 guys, and I hope Leishon is available as well. I know he's been dealing with an injury, trying to come back. Also, Mark says, Corey, could you please ask Don why the college hash marks are different than the pros? Would like to see college be the same as the pros. Don, you have a comment on that?
No, I prefer the college hash marks the way they were. The way they are, I should say. The way they were in the old days, it was the field was a third, and a third. In other words, 160 feet wide. So the hash marks were 53 feet 4 inches from the boundary. And between the hash marks was another 53 feet 4 inches. Now they've been moved. It's 60 feet outside the hash marks to the boundary. And of course, at least 40 feet in between the hash marks. I don't think we should mess with it any tighter. You probably are aware of this if you watch a lot of NFL games. The distance between the hash marks is exactly what the width of the upright is. So if you're kicking the ball, you never have to spot the ball outside the uprights. That's a dirty little secret that a lot of people don't know about, but obviously it'll give you a better percentage on field goals. But I like the game to be a little bit different than the NFL. I think where we have it now is a good place. We moved them 6 feet 8 inches, from where they used to be, moved them in toward the middle of the field. So that's 6 feet 8 on both sides of the field. So I think that's a pretty good balance. 60 feet outside the hash, 40 feet between the hash marks, 160 feet total.
Mark Rogers, the voice of college football, says, great show, Corey and Don. Thank you, Mark. I believe Ohio State is clearly the best team in the 10, top 3 to 4 in the nation. Also believe Iowa has a real shot. Caleb in that run game they're going to be huge, a huge challenge for the Bucks. So we shall see. And of course, myself and Mark Rogers get together every single Tuesday at 4:30 p.m. Central Time. That'll be a fun show tomorrow. And I think he's going to have an Ohio State guest, but believe me, Mark knows more about Ohio State than just about anybody, so that should be a fun one. Let's go to our phone line. We've got Landon on hold. Landon, welcome to the show.
Good evening, gentlemen. I'm really excited for this game coming up on Saturday. I actually got to be in attendance for the 2017 Iowa-Ohio State game. I'm a younger guy. It was one of the first Iowa games I went to. I remember JT Barrett threw that pick 6 to Armani Hooker on the first play of the game. Obviously, it's not going to be that type of game on Saturday. I hope it would be like that, but I'm looking for a mix between the 2017 game and 2 years ago game. I look at that 2013 Ohio State game, which I believe was a 34-24 loss in Columbus. Something like that could be possible. I believe the Hawkeyes should be somewhere in the 20-point range on Saturday. But I'm really excited to see how Caleb does coming back to Ohio. Same with Caleb Brown coming back to the college he played at. I'm looking for those guys to be big. So yeah, that's just my first question is just like, what are you guys looking forward to on Saturday and how you guys feel?
Comment first, if you don't mind, Don.
Sure.
You brought up 2013. Let me see if I'm right on this, Landon. 2013, obviously, was the Jake Rudock team, and that was the doozy touchdown, right? I think that went for 60-plus down the field. It's not often you get a tight end to go for that deep, and boy, I miss Jake Doozy. He's a guy whose career was cut just ridiculously short due to injury, and sadly short because he had some upside. But that was a close game. I mean, Iowa hung around in that one, and eventually Ohio State closed the door. But the one difference I would say, now these teams are different, but the one difference on the exterior that I look at, Landon, between these teams in this matchup, if I recall, 2013, wasn't that a Braxton Miller team for Ohio? Wasn't he the quarterback at Ohio State that year?
I'm not 100% sure, guys. I was an Iowa fan back in 2013, but I just was doing some research into the game. But sorry, Corey. I'm not 100% sure.
Oh, you're good. You're good. I'm pretty sure that was a Braxton Miller. And the reason I bring that up is Braxton Miller was just an incredible athlete. And he's sometimes the Ohio State quarterback that people forget about, but incredible athlete who went on to play receiver in the NFL. And I think Iowa's got a chance to tee up a couple of times on Will Howard. Now, Howard can run, Don, but that's one aspect of this that we've not talked about. We are so accustomed to seeing Ohio State quarterbacks that are true dual threat guys. Now, C.J. Stroud didn't like to run a lot, but between Stroud and Fields and Barrett, I mentioned Braxton Miller, the kid that Cardale Jones didn't really run a lot, but I don't even think Iowa ever played against him. They always tend to have athletic dual threat guys. Will Howard is not that. They also play a little of Devin Brown. I wanted to ask you about his usage because he threw a touchdown pass to Jeremiah Smith on Saturday. But this team doesn't – Ohio State, although I agree with what Mark said earlier, that this is probably one of the 3 or 4 best teams in the country. They don't scare me as much because of the fact that they don't have a quarterback who can just burn you with his legs. Am I right in saying that, Don?
Well, he's not likely to make a 60-yard run, but it is safe to say they're not afraid to run their quarterback, and I'm talking about a play designed for him. You might recall he ran for a touchdown in the red zone last Saturday, and that was a play designed for him to do so. So we have to be aware that they don't want to run him a lot, but in key situations, it's certainly a possibility that they might run the quarterback. And where that gets tricky, of course, they're in one back with their formation, and you're thinking more about pass. And what you fail to realize is a designed run play, and the running back is the lead blocker for the quarterback. So you think you've got the box well defended. All of a sudden, when they introduce that aspect of their offense, now they've got one more blocker than what you thought they had. And they've already proven that they might do that, and we have to be prepared for that possibility. Depending on down and distance, it's an even more likely possibility. I wouldn't necessarily expect it on 3rd and long because it's not easy to gain 10 yards if you're 3rd and 10. To gain 10 yards on Q draw is not easy to do, but certainly on 3rd and 5 they might. I believe the touchdown run last Saturday, I believe, was maybe from the 4-yard line, as I recall. So they certainly are not opposed to involving the quarterback as a runner. And even though he's not what you would call super elusive, he's a big, strong guy. He understands how to run, how to get his pads down. And he ran some at K-State, and he's certainly comfortable running the ball as much as they want him to.
But he's not Justin Fields. He's not C.J. Stroud. He's not R.J. Barrett. He's certainly not Braxton Miller. Braxton Miller, I just looked up the stats. Listen to these stats from 2013, that Iowa game. He was 22 of 27, Don, for 222 yards, 2 touchdowns. And, oh, by the way,
don't tell me he ran for 100.
Had 18 rushes for 102 yards. That is against an Iowa defense. It was pretty good. That was a pretty good linebacking core in 2013, one of the best Iowa's had. So, anyways, I appreciate Mark confirming that was a Braxton Miller year. He's sometimes a forgotten guy. But yeah, offensive player of the year ×2 in the Big Ten. And I don't know. I think they're better at without, I'm looking through the box score from 2013. That was a Carlos Hyde year. Obviously, he was really good. And then with the threat of Braxton Miller on the ground, Ohio State's been so loaded at receiver. And I made the comment a week ago with Mark on his show that I thought this receiver core is probably, obviously, it's really good. I watched Jeremiah Smith Saturday. I was really impressed. How can you not be? However, I'm comparing the current receiver core to what we've had the last couple of years at Ohio State, and I think you could say they've taken a step back. They have been as dominant at that position, Don, for the last several years.
I don't want to say that because I don't want to make them mad.
No, I'm. Well, if Jeremiah Smith's watching this show, he's got problems. But the point is, they, Marvin Harrison Jr., Smith and Jigba, what's his face, Fleming, Abuka was there.
Maybe here's a good question. When's the last time they weren't loaded at receiver? They've always been loaded at receiver.
So they're going to be a challenge. And you talked about making them keep everything in front of you, right? That's what Iowa usually does best. And if they can be sound in their assignments, besides just hanging out in zone most of the game, Don, how do you deal with Jeremiah Smith? And are you confident in Jamari's ability in a one-on-one situation to defend him?
Well, unless we change up, we tend to play our corners left and right. So if we're going to do that on Saturday, it means anytime they want to line up Smith or Abuka versus our other corner, they can do it. All they have to do is line him up on that side of the formation to get what they want, to get the matchup that they want.
So you don't think Phil will violate his principles as it relates to maybe letting Jamari Harris, who's clearly the best corner, shadow Jeremiah Smith? Or do you think it's 6 of one, half dozen of another? They're both dangerous, so we're going to stick to our principles here.
Yeah, I have as much fear for Abuka as I do Jeremiah Smith, honestly.
Well, Abuka's to me, Abuka doesn't scream burner like Smith does. Smith, to me, I watch Abuka run, and he's obviously athletic. He's a really good pass catcher. He's a great receiver, right? And like Doc P says in the chat, a step back is still elite. I acknowledge that. I'm not questioning that whatsoever. I'm just saying Iowa went up against 2 years ago one of the best receivers. Now, Smith and Jigba was coming off a hamstring injury in that game. But between Marvin Harrison Jr. and Smith and Jigba and the rest of that core, it's ridiculous. So, and Aiden Payne brings this up. He says, TJ Hall terrifies me against Ohio State. And it may not be TJ. He's listed as number one on the depth chart. But we saw Deshaun Lee get most of the snaps with the ones against Minnesota, Don. Right. And who knows what the bye week brought. And maybe that's to Iowa's advantage, but probably not. They have a battle for that other spot opposite Jamari. That's clear.
Well, I mentioned, of course, if we could play zone all day long and still hold up on the run, that'd be a good thing. But as far as protecting our other corner, there are ways to do that. Of course, if you play cover 2, you're protecting them in that they're flat responsible, not deep responsible. Of course, you got to be concerned about 3-on-2 schemes way down the field because you only got 2 defenders. So you better do a great job of reading that quarterback's eyes. If he's looking to the left side of the field, then obviously you need to favor where he's likely to go with the ball. Some quarterbacks are really adept at looking off defenders, but others are not. So another thing you can do, though, that gives you another option, you can simply cloud the coverage to the side of the lesser corner. In other words, always keep him in flat responsibility. And then you can play 3 deep in behind with the other 3 defensive backs that are out there. So you can roll up that corner routinely and play off coverage all day long with Jamar Harris if you wanted to, and still be in a sound defense with 3 deep in the back end. So there are things you can do to avoid exposing your lesser corner. And Phil Parker certainly knows everything that is a reasonable option for us to be able to get that done, and he'll use them as he needs to, I'm sure.
Landon, I hate to get away from you. Anything else?
Yeah, guys, I don't want to change this topic. I want to continue on the Ohio State, but one thing I wanted to point out was I was sick last Tuesday. I listened to all of Coach Lester's interview, and I know we talked about what he said about how he thought Cade had his best game in his opinion at Minnesota. I thought that was interesting. I just kind of have a question about the QB play, right? I mean, looking at Iowa's history, we are in a new day and age with Iowa QB play with the transfer portal. We're not in that system anymore where Iowa brings in a quarterback their freshman year, they sit them, then, they develop them, and then they play all 3 years like we saw with guys like C.J. Beathard, Nate Stanley, Spencer Petras. We're in a situation now where we don't know really. Iowa's quarterback could be changing every 1 or 2 years. Next year, we might see Brendan Sullivan, and then next year, who knows? But what I look at with this year is I say, well, we have Cade McNamara left on our roster, which who even knows if he's going to be an NFL guy. These next couple of games is really when Cade needs to prove himself, because especially if he wants to be an NFL draft pick, because I don't know right now if he's even a guy that can make it. I believe Nate Stanley was a 6th or 7th round pick back in 2020. Like, Cade is on that verge of being one of those guys that's a 6th or 7th round pick. But Cade really, in my opinion, I understand Iowa has that run game solidified, but he needs to really get that passing game going more if he wants to really become one of those NFL draft quarterbacks.
I don't think he is right now, Don.
Yeah, he is. He isn't. Yeah,
I'll tell you why. He's not very big. He doesn't have a very big arm. And who was it that commented the other day when I made a statement about Cade's arm not being that big? And somebody's like, well, watch the throw against Utah State, first play from scrimmage last year, and he threw it 50 yards to Seth Anderson. And all I did is I went and I Googled, how far should your average high school quarterback be able to throw? And what I got back was most good high school quarterbacks should be able to throw at 50 yards, no problem. Like 50 actual yards from where they're standing to the target.
Right.
So just because Cade McNamara was able to throw to a wide open Seth Anderson for 50 yards for a touchdown does not tell me he's got a big arm. He does not. And he's not going to test that great. He's not going to be, certainly his 40 is not going to be very good. He's coming off 2 serious knee injuries. There's a lot of things going against him. But I think to Landon's point, if you're going to make a statement, hey, you get a national champion contender this year. And even though Washington's a lot different, you've got a defending national runner-up next week. How much do you read into Tim's comments about this past game being Cade's best performance, and what do you need to see to feel better about quarterback this week in Columbus?
Well, I do know that Tim made the comment, we had some plays designed with a little bit of luck to go downfield with the ball. And there were times last Saturday where I was recognizing those plays were called, and it seemed to me either they were covered. I don't know. You can't be looking at all places at once, of course, and the TV replay doesn't really give you a very good idea what the coverage looked like downfield. But there were times when I sensed that maybe he came off a deep receiver a little bit too quickly. That's just my opinion. And to explain it, Cade might simply say, well, Coach, he was covered. Well, if he's covered, he's covered, But we used to have an expression, too, if he's even, he's leaving. Meaning if the receiver is even with the corner, he's the one that's sprinting down the field. The defender's transitioning into a sprint down the field. He's in a back pedal for a while, of course, and then he's got to transition into a sprint to cover a deep receiver. So if you're able to get on the same yard line as that defender, there's a good chance, of course, that you can gain a little ground further down the field if the ball, in fact, does go up and over. So, and then there were times I heard Coach Fry say it. I've said it myself as a head coach. I've told quarterbacks at times, and I know Coach Fry did too, listen, we realize he's going to be back there with our receiver, but I want you to throw it anyway because our guy can high point the ball, and their guy can't judge the ball nearly as well. Invariably, those plays ended up as catches for us. So there is some truth to that. There's that old adage, well, why do you think he's playing defensive back? They recruited him as a wide receiver, but he's got 4.6 speed, but he's got 5 flat hands. If he doesn't catch well enough, he ends up playing defense. That's the old adage. So all that being said, there are times when you want to take a shot, and let's think back to the crazy play that Cade had to our freshman receiver, you could argue that's a ball that absolutely should not have been thrown. Was that back in game 1 or game 2? Game 1, wasn't it?
I believe it was.
Touchdown.
Game 1.
That's a ball. You could say that's a poor decision. That ball should have never been thrown. And yet our guy went up and got it simply because he thought he was – I'm not even sure if it was meant for him. I think he busted the route, right? He wasn't even supposed to be in that spot.
Yeah,
but to his credit –
guys in the same spot.
Yeah. To his credit, he saw the ball, and he played the ball, and he played it better than anyone else. Truthfully, their defender didn't play the ball at all. He was playing the man. You got to play the ball.
So can we address the comments from Tim about how he thought that Saturday's game was actually Cade's best performance thus far? And the way he explained it to the media, Don, is he said, well, we had 3 drops, and I believe him on that. I agree with him on that. There were several drops. He said there was a bad play that Tim takes responsibility for, in which I believe that might have been the sack or may have been a different play where Cade had to get rid of it. And then he said there were 2 other plays in which receivers didn't run the routes right and the timing got screwed up. And so he's looking at it and saying, I evaluate him as 11 of 13. Can you play that game? Did you evaluate your quarterbacks like that at times when there were circumstances similar to that of Cade's and look at this and say, hey, 11 of 19 for 62 doesn't sound good. But when you take into account how the game was played, how it was called, and what was happening around our quarterback, he had a pretty good game, because that's kind of what Tim was preaching on Tuesday.
Well, I just think back to my days as a tight end coach, and then after coaching tight ends back in the 80s, becoming the OC in the 90s. I remember this vividly. Marv Cook was a consensus All-American, and Marv knew for me to play a great game for Coach P, if I'm lucky, my grade will be approaching 90%. My point is we had a really high standard. And a little bit later, when I was the coordinator, I couldn't help but notice lesser tight ends were grading out better than consensus All-American Marv Cook did. And the way I saw that, the tight end coach is simply not being demanding enough of that player. I remember Marv played an incredible game at Ohio State. You remember the game? I think he had about 160 yards receiving that day. Pretty amazing when you think about it for a tight end. And the play that everybody remembers, of course, is the play for the winning touchdown with seconds left. And after the game, I told Marv, and I was as genuine as I could be because I had tears in my eyes. I said, Marv, coached tight ends a long time here at Iowa. That's the greatest game a tight end ever played for me. I want you to know that. And he said, Coach, I really appreciate you saying that. I know you mean it, but you're going to be really disappointed on a few plays. Marv had an idea then. My point was great players, even though it's impossible to do it, they aspire to play a perfect game. Tim Dwight was that way. Tim wanted to play a perfect game. Well, my standards were so high, it's damn near impossible to get it done. But that didn't mean you weren't going to try. And if you even approach that, then you do play a great football game. Marv played a great game that day to beat Ohio State. I'm sure Ohio State fans remembered a little bit like Iowa fans do. How in God's name did that guy get all that done in one game? But he did, because he was a great player, and he had the highest of standards for himself. And I'll take a little credit for that because I set a really high standard for Marv Cook and for Tim Dwight, because you can challenge those kind of players. No, you shouldn't challenge a normal player to try to play a perfect game. That's absurd. But if you happen to have a great player, go ahead and assist him even better than you might otherwise by challenging him to play a perfect game. And all Marv wanted to know is, what could I have done differently on these 3 plays to grade out as a plus on those plays too? And that's what great players do. They aspire to play a perfect game. It's impossible to do it, but the great ones are always trying.
Landon, anything else before I let you go?
I guess one more thing. Just, go Hawks, obviously, but I just really, I emphasize that point that you were talking about. Obviously, I wasn't around in 1984. I've obviously been born in the 2000s. But just what my dad talks about from the Hawkeyes back in the day. I mean, it's been since 91 since we came into Columbus and won, guys. I mean, that has been, 33 years, I guess. And, I feel like it's time to change that, guys, this weekend, because it's been a while. And I mean, we've seen the Hawkeyes get close in the past couple of years. Look back to 2009, look back to these past Iowa seasons. But, I just look at this weekend's game and I say, I watched the Michigan State this weekend game and I said, this looks like a team that Iowa could possibly beat. I think one more thing also, that Iowa State loss earlier this season is starting to look better on our resume with them being ranked higher now. And so, even in case we do lose this game, and if we can end up winning out, guys, and being a 10-2 team with 2 ranked losses to teams, looking better on our college football playoff resume, it would hurt to see Iowa 3-2 after this weekend, obviously. But I feel confident as this weekend goes, and I'm really excited to see it. I'm feeling it, guys. Honestly, if I would give a score prediction, I would say, for me, my honest prediction, I think the Hawkeyes could maybe possibly get it done. I would say, if the Hawkeyes would win, it would have to be some kind of 24-20 game or 23-20. But no matter what, guys, go Hawks, and thanks for having me on today.
Thanks, Landon. Appreciate the call. Hey, good stuff. If they hold them down to 23, they're going to have a shot. 20 or 23, either one of those. And Landon did ask in the private chat, he wanted to know about the laces thing. We've discussed the laces, but there were more shots coming out of Saturday's game against Minnesota in which Cade was not using the laces on a throw. And I know you at one time said there are throws that quarterbacks make that are quick throws where you're not going to bother using the laces. But there is a perception in the fan base right now that Cade doesn't use the laces ever. Do you buy that?
No.
You don't believe that he's never using laces?
Well, to begin with, when you're in direct, when you're underneath the center, anybody that's ever coached quarterbacks will be sure the center understands how to put the ball up to the quarterback.
Right.
And it's logical, I'm sure, Corey, to you, that the ball would come up so that the laces are already across that throwing hand's fingers.
Yeah.
So the only ones that are in doubt would be shotgun snaps or pistol snaps. And even then, if you watch a lot of quarterbacks, they'll actually find the laces. You can find the laces blindfolded. Imagine how many times they handle a football. They can quickly find the laces, and that's what most of them do. Some of them maybe don't bother. It's probably a personal preference thing. But I think there are quarterbacks that play on Sunday even that routinely find the laces.
So would you say most do?
I don't know. I've never really bothered to study it. But it wouldn't surprise me at all if most do, yeah.
Mark, reminding everybody to hit that like button. We got about 150 in here. Please hit that thumbs up button. It does help us in the algorithm. Just takes 2 seconds to scroll down, hit the like. And also, our guy Jackson, reminding everybody that we're not far from 10,000 subscribers, but we need your help. If you're not subscribed, that's free and simple to do as well. Just scroll down, hit the subscribe button, and you're in, and then you'll get, of course, our shows and notifications when we go live, when we're going to go live. If you have the bell turned on for notifications, again, hit that subscribe button, hit the like button. We appreciate your support. Doc P wants to know when Seth Anderson will be back. No word yet from Kirk. We will hear from Kirk tomorrow. Esther wanted to know how you're doing tonight, Don. I don't want to ignore Esther. What percentage of, and along with that, what percentage of chance do you give Iowa of actually winning this game? I know Landon's predicting it, but you want to care to throw a percentage out there? And then I'll tell you what ESPN says as it relates to Iowa's chances.
Well, let me just make a prediction as to what ESPN says. I'm assuming ESPN will give us no more than 25% chance of winning. Probably something less than that.
10%.
Well, 10 is less than 25.
Well, let's be clear. Mark, bring this up in the chat. How about this? 50-2 in Big Ten play at home since 2012. That is your Ohio State Buckeyes. 50-2 at home in the Big Ten Conference, Don.
Well, to Mark, I'll say, we beat them more than a time. Maybe only twice. I can't remember. We didn't play them every year, but I do remember a couple of big wins in the shoe.
Mark brings up 1987. Mark broke his heart, 4th and 29.
Yeah, excuse me. You're right, Mark. That was an amazing day for
okay,
us.
Don?
Oh, the water's going down the wrong pipe. I'm okay.
All right, let's as Coach tries to gain his composure here. Let's go to our next comment, or excuse me, our next caller. And that is James, and we got Erica. James, welcome to the show.
Good. How you doing?
Good. How are you, sir?
What's up, James?
I'm good. First off, I just see somebody in the comments say, and it's something I do kind of agree with, is that like Michigan State, their one corner might not be as good as Jamari, but their 2, 3, 4 probably better than Iowa's 2, 3, 4, right? So like maybe that might be why they competed a little bit more, right? Because like we don't know how TJ Hall Deshaunley would fare in a game like this against those guys, right? Like Jamari, obviously, you know what he's done, what he's done these last 4 weeks, right? Like how he's looked this year. But like after that, it does kind of get scary, and with all the weapons they have,
Well, I would
just
venture
don't know
to
how to
say
feel.
Iowa's DBs as a whole, when you add in Sebastian Castro and Schulte.
Yeah, I think I'm talking
Either
more corners, but
I know, but in Tringer or
Yeah.
Wampa, I would
Yeah.
think the way Iowa's going to approach this game, Don, it's the unit as a whole that's under pressure to perform well, as opposed to maybe individuals. Isn't that kind of the whole point of the approach that you talked about earlier, taking the pressure off whoever that young corner is opposite Jamari?
Right. Obviously, the other DBs have a say in what happens too, and we may ask. Prime example is we might ask Jamari to play off coverage all day long, either man or zone. If we're going to roll up on the other side, we better think twice about playing cover 2 all day, because that's going to weaken our run defense a little bit if we play 2 high safeties. The one thing I'm sure of is Phil Parker will have a good plan from one possession to the next, and those are the calls that Phil's going to be making. And I guarantee you, our players will have a great understanding of what he expects them to do in each of these coverages.
No, I definitely agree with that. It's just it is kind of they have a lot of depth. They're probably the most depth of that. One of the most deep at that position in the nation. Just like with what they have at wide receiver. So it does kind of scare you a little bit with all the pieces they have in that room compared to every other team we play. But
let's look at let me give you. Go ahead, Don.
I was just simply going to say one thing maybe in our favor. It's kind of obvious. Ohio State has not been tested this entire season. So the first thing we have to do is simply keep it a 1-score game, hopefully for all 60 minutes. I wouldn't mind us having an edge with that 1-score game. I prefer that over them having an edge with 1 score. But just keep the outcome in doubt. And the longer that goes on, you think about it, Corey, the pressure. We feel pressure to play well. How do you think Ohio State feels? They're playing at home and they're ranked 3rd in the country. I promise you they feel a lot of pressure too. And they're still just college students. So the longer the game goes with the score in doubt, with the outcome in doubt, the more pressure on their sideline. And truthfully, we've got a lot to gain and not so much to lose, because they're the one that's 3rd ranked. We're not.
And
so we simply need to keep the game close as long as possible and find a way to win it in the end. And if the fans are anxious, then the players are going to get anxious too, because they recognize the same thing the fans do. This isn't supposed to be happening. We're Ohio State. The point spread is whatever it is. But if we're beating the point spread in any given moment, that's a good sign. Let's just play well and let's not beat ourselves. And let's not be afraid to take some calculated risk. You've always heard me say you can't steal second with your foot on first. You better be bold at some point in the game. Otherwise, if you simply play not to lose, that all but guarantees that you will.
Askabon, thank you for the super chat. Our schedule.
I was going to say, especially if it's a good team. I remember vividly when we were waiting on Ohio State a few years ago, and that's the one-sided game in Kenny. I remember vividly making the comment, throw caution to the wind. You're not going to beat these guys unless you take shots. And we did, and it paid off.
And Askabon, thank you for the super. Here, he says, our schedule isn't bad after Ohio State. And let me just say this, one more thing as it relates to giving up big plays. You talked about the depth at receiver, James. But I'm going to come out with my official game preview tomorrow, Tuesday. But in the meantime, let me bring this up. One thing that could possibly lend its assistance to Iowa or be to Iowa's advantage is the fact that they have given up big plays to this point. And maybe that's a bit of a wake-up call. They unfortunately gave up plays in a loss to Iowa State. We talked about the game against Troy. They really didn't give up big plays against Minnesota. The one big one that they gave up that I can remember, a couple of them, they had some missed tackles, but the one big play, I'm not sure it was a catch. You could hear Phil Parker frustrated by that call when the Minnesota receiver had that ball pinned along the sideline. But the fact that Ohio State has not yet been tested, Iowa has a bye week heading into the game, and then Ohio State has not seen Iowa yet really attempt shots down the field. Maybe that lends itself to Iowa's advantage because, as we talked about earlier, shots that Tim Lester had planned for Minnesota, he didn't show. And I still go back to that. I think they're going to have to take shots down the field to win. And so, I mean, hey, Ryan Day and this staff, they don't know what Tim Lester's got on the docket. Now, maybe they go back and look at some tape from Western Michigan or from some other job where he's coordinated. But Donna, I mean, I would guess they're going into this without knowing a whole lot about what Iowa's arsenal is like as it relates to getting the ball up over the top. It may look on paper like Iowa's incapable of getting the ball downfield, but I don't know if that's been proven yet.
Right, I agree with you. Looking back at our Minnesota game, we had 6 explosive plays. We only gave up 3, none of which were super explosive. They were all in the 20s.
And I just want to acknowledge the comment here from Aiden Payne, and I'll just answer this. If we lose this game, do we start Sullivan the rest of the season? Well, the answer is no. That should not be the evaluating tool, that in and of itself, whether Iowa wins this game or not. And also, Kirk is not going to evaluate the quarterback position that way. He's not going to look at this and say, well, we lost. I guess we got to go to the next guy. This is a hard game to win. Nobody expects Iowa to win this game. So the answer to that question is no. I'd like to see him involved more, but we've talked about that. Anything else, James?
Well, yeah. First off, I have 2 more things. First off, I don't know if somebody talked about this, but Kamari being in front of Jazz in the depth chart, I don't know if obviously Jazz didn't play last week, so you can't really evaluate how he is on a week to week or 2 weeks ago, whatever. You can't base him on a week to week basis if they don't play. But I kind of thought that was a little weird too with Kamari being in front of Jazz.
They're on the same line, James.
Is it or? But that one was listed. I didn't see if it was or designation. I just seen Kamari was listed in front of me. I didn't pay attention to this or designation.
It's or. There's an or.
Okay. My bad. I didn't see that one. But one more question I have is about the secondary. It's about safety, right? We know X is what he is, right? He hasn't been great. Cone's been seeing a lot more playing time. And how do you guys feel that they've been doing with that situation, right? Like, I feel like they've been playing it really well, the way they've been playing, rotating them kind of. Not all the time, but, like, you'll see Cone out there in a couple of drives. You'll see X out there in a couple of other drives if you really pay attention to it. I feel like they're playing that well. I just wanted to get you guys' thoughts on how you feel like they're playing that situation with X and Cone and Tringer.
Well, I think Coach Parker's smart with what he does. And I think what he's doing is simply giving both guys a chance to earn the job. And he's simply going to play the most that has done the best job in recent weeks. I don't know how those grades all turn out, but obviously it's good for the starter to understand, listen, you don't have this job locked up. Your obligation to this football team is to play better than anybody else at your position. If there's some question in my mind, I'm going to play your backup some and give him a chance to prove he's better than you. And I don't expect you to like that, but that's my obligation to the team, is to give the team the best performance we can out of every individual position. That's what gives us the best chance to win the game. So my guess is that more than one safety will play, and it would depend on the situations. Maybe Coach Parker thinks one of them's a better half player than the other. You might see that particular player out there more if we're playing half coverage. There's a lot that goes into deciding who's in the game at any given moment. Do you expect them to run or throw? Obviously, that might make a difference. But the bottom line, until you know for sure who the best player is, give the backup a chance to prove that he's better than maybe the starter is. It's good for morale. It's also nice for you to be able to verify what you thought is true. If you can't verify it, you got to be man enough to say, you know what? We've been playing the wrong guy. We're going to make a change.
James, appreciate you calling in, sir, as always. And
Definitely, we'll see how it goes this weekend. And hopefully, if we can't fight, if we can't win, at least just show fight. You know, that'd be big going into the next week too. You don't want to ever get too down on yourself. You know how some of these games, you never know how they're going to go, right? So just as long as we show up and ready to play, we never know what's going to happen on the field. And I think Don knows that better than anybody as a coach. You just never know how it's going to go, right? If you show up, you got a chance, you know. So
absolutely. We'll talk to you after the game, James.
Yep.
Thank you, sir. All right, I got to get to this. One of our premium members, you might recognize this name, Don. Tom Nickel says, hey, guys, as a former player, I appreciate you, Corey, for coming up with this platform for all of us. Certainly a huge thank to Coach Patterson for sharing the offensive lessons. Go Hawks. Don, you want to tell everybody who Tom Nickel is?
I'd be happy to. He's the pride of Green Bay Preble High School. And Tommy, as a freshman in 1981, we go to the big house and we win the game on the strength of 3 Tommy Nickel field goals, 3 for 3, as I recall. There wasn't a miss. Great defensive game, huge win for the program because let's face it, at that time, they referred to the Big Ten as the Big Two and the Little Eight, and we know who the Big Two were. So it was a huge win for our program, and as you know, that ended up being a Rose Bowl season. And a lot of people would say that's the greatest turnaround in the history of college football. I don't know about that, but certainly it was among the best. That's safe to say.
Tom, appreciate you being a premium subscriber and for interacting. It's always fun to hear from former players and of course, people who have worked with Coach Patterson. 1981, right, Don? Is that what the year we're talking about? Jack, do you think you'll be running this in 2030? I'm guessing tongue-in-cheek a little bit there. I don't even know how to answer that. And yes, there was a schedule update. Florida Atlantic now moved to 2030. Albany is the home opener next year. So that was the news today, Don. What big news on a Monday. Doc P, can we pass the ball downfield or use our tight ends? Do you feel like Iowa's tight end usage has been less than you expected, Don? It has went down from what we saw over the past number of years. Do you expect that to change?
Of course, what is our team rushing average right now per game? Any idea?
I can pull that up.
Is it 200 yards or not?
Yeah, Iowa's averaging, let's see, rushing yards per game.
But it's over 200.
All I'm seeing is, 1,000 divided by 4, so about 250.
Yeah, 250 a game. Well, if you're running for 250 a game, a tight end might not get the ball quite as often if you're running for that kind of yardage. So I don't get too hung up on numbers. The question is, can you efficiently move the ball down the field and put up necessary points? And we're doing a much better job of that this year than we did a year ago, and that's what we all expected to happen. We've got a seasoned lineup compared to last year, and we're getting better results.
Kelvin's telling me to recognize Tom Nickel on here. I thought I just did. Didn't we just do that, Don?
Yes.
He just threw this up in the chat. I just did that, Kelvin, so maybe you're a little behind in the show. Pat says there was lots of motion and misdirection the first half against Minnesota, went away from it in the second half. Did you see that going back and watching the tape against Minnesota, less motion in that second half?
Well, I didn't chart anything like that. All I know is here's another Hayden Fry expression. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. So if things are working, then keep dialing up a lot of those same plays. That's smart. You know, we ran at least 3 nakeds in the game, maybe 4. But just because we hit it to start the second half doesn't mean we're not going to run it again. The next time I recall, we only gained 8 with it. Well, 8's a good play, unless you need 10. So it was a productive play. And one thing we always talked about, Coach Fry always wanted to know, give me a list of the plays that were good to us in the first half. I guarantee you, he's going to want some of those same plays to be dialed up in the second half. Don't assume that they figured out how to stop it. You always heard Coach Fry say again, milk it till it's dry. And once we have an idea of what they need to do to stop it, once they go with that adjustment, guess what, Corey? We know what we're going to do next when they do in fact take away the first play. It's like a big chess game. You stay one step ahead of the enemy.
Milk that cow till she's bone dry, right, Don? Bone dry.
Milk it till it's dry.
All right. So a couple things here. First of all, the question by Brandon: do you think we'll be able to get pressure on the QB? I think they will. Again, they ran the ball really well. I haven't seen anything. I haven't watched every Ohio State game. I watched the game against Michigan State. I didn't see anything. They gave me indicators that they're susceptible to giving up sacks. But Phil Parker, best in the business, and although he's a DB's coach, he's very pointed and deliberate as to when he sends an extra person, sends an extra guy or two. And I do think that he will do that, given the fact that they have a less mobile quarterback than in past matchups. I don't think they're just going to let Will Howard sit back there and sling the ball around the field. I don't know that you get overly aggressive because that's not his style, but I think there's got to be an even balance, and I think Phil Parker will find that. Let's go to our next caller. We've got Erica on hold. Erica, welcome to the show.
Good evening, guys. How's it going?
Hi, Erica.
So I wanted to ask, since I always like hearing about Hayden Fry, what do you think Hayden would say to the team this coming weekend about the OSU game?
Well, one of the things he'd say, he'd remind them, listen, I know you feel a huge responsibility to play well on Saturday, but just for the record, if you feel pressure, I will assure you that Ohio State's players feel more pressure because we're the chaser and they're the chasee, right? They're the one that's setting the pace. They're ranked third in the nation. So as much pressure as we feel, it's safe to say as long as we can keep the game competitive, ultimately they're going to feel greater pressure. And that's a good thing in our favor. So we got to get off to a good start. We got to keep the game close. You've heard me talk about working to keep it a one-score game. And the longer that continues, the more pressure they're going to feel. And here's the nice aspect of it, too. My guess is a 10-2 record with a loss to Iowa State and a loss to Ohio State will still get us in the playoffs. And the only reason it wouldn't necessarily get us in the playoffs would be if Saturday's game is one-sided. Obviously, we don't need that. We don't want that. We're not going to – I'm sure our players are going to tell you that's not going to happen. We're not going to allow that to happen. Yeah. Ohio State's going to try to make it happen, but we're going to have a lot to say with that outcome too.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. And about the pressure idea, that Ohio State feels more pressure. I'm not so sure about that based on what I've seen. And again, social media, you take it with a grain of salt. But to me, from what little I've seen, it looks like a lot of Ohio State fans are just overlooking this game completely and focusing on Oregon the next week. And actually, I think that might be a positive for us if they're overlooking us.
I think the game is well placed in the schedule, not just because Iowa has the bye week, but like you said, Erica, not that Ohio State's going to overlook Iowa, but if there's ever a time to overlook Iowa, it might be prior to a trip out west to a state where they probably haven't played in I don't know how long. Mark would be able to tell us. But a big game against what we thought was the second best team in the conference and one of the 5 best teams in the country heading into the season. So I agree with you. I think it's a perfectly placed game. And, Michigan State was probably a challenging prep, even though Ohio State is clearly better, but it's a new coaching staff. There's a lot of new staffs in this conference, but that was probably a bit of a challenge. And we saw some hiccups. Hey, one thing we haven't brought up, Don, you probably mentioned it earlier, but Michigan State, do you realize that if you count turnovers on downs, they turned the ball over 4 times.
Oh, my God, really?
Michigan State turned it over 4 times in the red zone, Don.
Wow.
Yeah. They were 1 for 3 in the red zone. Yeah.
That's horrible. Not even our team has done that.
Let me pull up this stat from, and I'll walk you through this real quick because I wanted to make sure we talked about it, and I had it pulled up earlier. So, again, final score from the weekend, 38-7, Ohio State over Michigan State. But how about these 4 stats? Michigan State had opportunities, and to Michigan State's credit, one of the turnovers, they turned Ohio State right back over, but they were -2 on turnovers, Don, and that's not counting turnovers on downs. So if you look at their play charts, we'll start first quarter. first offensive drive of the game, they get down to the Ohio State 20. So maybe you didn't count this one, Don, because they were at the 20.
Right.
So
No, I did.
You did? Okay.
And that's when they failed with the snake.
4th and 1, they go Aiden Childs sneak, no gain, turnover on downs. Second offensive drive of the game, they get to the Ohio State 37, then complete a long pass down to the 19, fumble the ball away.
Oh, dear.
They fumbled the ball away at the Ohio State 19. They actually forced an Ohio State interception, got a touchdown, but then the very next drive, Michigan State is down at the Ohio 16, and Childs fumbles the ball away. All right, now that's, 3 if you count the turnover on downs. And then I believe there was one. Am I missing one? The interception. Maybe they were. Oh, you're right.
Well, let's not forget, on 3rd and goal, they should have intercepted the ball in the end zone. It was a routine play. He dropped it on 4th down. They got that was their first touchdown, as I recall. I think that made it 10-7 or 10-0. I'm sorry, 10-0.
So you're right. So 3 different turnovers down in the red zone, plus what you just outlined. That's a lot of missed opportunity. Now they got beat by 31, but I'm just simply saying, if you watch the game and give Ohio State credit on a couple of those for forcing turnovers, but still, like a couple of those fumbles, it's like there's just no reason for it. And I reflect on Iowa's loss at Penn State a year ago, Don. It was 23, was it 23-0 or 31-0? I never remember. I think it was 31-0. But remember, Iowa had a nice drive with it. Remember, they drove the ball, had a couple of first downs, punted with Torrey Taylor, got the ball back in good field position. They're actually down in the red zone with Eric All. He fumbles. And that's all she wrote. Penn State went up the field, scored, and they ran away with that game in the second half. And I'm not saying the game would have been different, but boy, how big is it when you turn the ball over down inside the opponent's 20? And Michigan State did that 3 times on Saturday against the Buckeyes at home. So obviously you got to win the turnover battle. That's first and foremost. But I was not that impressed with Ohio State collectively, maybe as much as I anticipated. They're really good. Don't get me wrong. But I do think there are opportunities there. And Michigan State just didn't take advantage of a few.
No doubt about it. And that's why after the game, the Michigan State coach said we were not overwhelmed. We just had too many self-inflicted wounds. That's how he felt immediately after the game. Don't get me wrong, Ohio State's good at all positions. But here's the truth. I was pretty damn good at all positions too. And it's hard to measure who's better than who, because it's a war that lasts for 3 hours. Maybe one player, let's just talk about an O lineman versus a D lineman. Maybe one of them has the edge in the first quarter, but the bigger question, which one has the edge over the rest of the game? Because it's a battle of will.
Yeah, actually, you know what, Coach? I was going to say that, we still haven't seen our team play a full game yet, a full, 60-minute game. We've seen them play, I would argue, up to this point, 3 quarters against Minnesota. They were very successful in those 3 quarters. But in order to win this, so my quote-unquote keys to the game is that phrase, everyone uses that phrase, keys to the game. So that is number 1 for me. We have to play a full game. Otherwise, I don't think we stand a good chance, honestly, unless Ohio State has a lot of self-inflicted wounds and penalties, which I don't see happening because they're a veteran team and everything. That's not going to happen. I also don't see us self-inflicting a lot of wounds either, so that's good news. I also think we need to get the tight ends a lot more involved. As much as I love Luke, I think the secret weapon, quote unquote secret, with quotation marks, would be Ostringa, because everyone knows what Luke is capable of. Ostringa has kind of been less in the spotlight than Luke. A lot less people talk about him. I think he could be a good secret weapon for us, and I think we need to script some plays to get him involved. And then also another thing I wanted to say, I think that we should try Nestor out at cornerback because we haven't seen him yet. So it'd be good to see what he can do. And also, if he ends up being very successful, which I think he has a chance at, that will surprise Ohio State possibly because no one has seen Nestor play. So we need these surprise elements. We need to pull out all the stops and pull out all the surprise elements to win this game. And that's just the reality as far as I see it.
I agree with you, Erica, to an extent. However, you're throwing a young guy into the fire when you put him out against Ohio State for his first start.
Yeah, I would rather surprise Ohio State with play calling than with a player out there playing that hadn't played much at all.
But honestly, I mean, we haven't had much to talk about in that second cornerback spot. So, and I'm not saying we stay with him. I'm saying give him a chance, kind of similar to what I say about the quarterback battle. I'm not saying we should unconditionally put him in there and then just keep him in there, even if he does badly. Give him a few plays. If he does good, keep him in.
Well, we don't
And then
know.
if
Yeah,
he
we
does a
don't know
bad
what
job,
happened. We don't know what happened during the bye week. I mean, Phil has painted this picture like these guys are neck and neck. So maybe you're right. Maybe, hey, if he's the best guy, I have no doubt Phil Parker has proven he's going to play the best guy.
right,
So
right, yeah, I
hey,
agree with that.
maybe you're right. Maybe they'll roll and they'll roll into that game with John Nestor as a starting cornerback. Maybe they'll play all of them. I mean, maybe I don't know that you want to audition against Ohio State, right? But especially at that position, but. Yeah, I mean, it's a tough assignment regardless, or whoever this is. It's a tough assignment, and that whole defensive backfield has to be on the same page. You can't
I
have
like
communication errors and mess ups in this one.
I like Nestor's attitude, though. I think he plays hard. I think he's got a winning attitude. Just I've seen when he's talked to media and stuff like that, he seems very tough, and I think we need that toughness in this game. And another key to this is special teams. Reason I say that, we saw that Reese did a great job last, against Minnesota. And I also listened to an interview he did that just came out this morning on that Talking Hawks podcast that the Vandenbergs do. I don't know if you guys have seen that, but he was talking about he has all this experience playing different sports. So he's a very athletic guy. So why can't we do, here comes Corey, you're going to like this one. Why not do some exotics here, right? And have him throw for a first down or something like that. If he's that athletic, like it sounds like, why not give it a try? We have to pull out all the stops.
Well, one thing I did say against Minnesota 2 weeks ago, and I was being serious. Don't be surprised if we see a trick play here at some point soon. And I thought maybe it would come against Minnesota. Maybe it'll come against Ohio State. I don't know that it'll be Reese Dakin. I did see on that Kids Day, I was standing 20 feet from Reese Dakin, and he was throwing the ball pretty well. I mean, he throws a pretty good spiral, Don. Better than Torrey Taylor through his first year at Iowa. I'll say that.
Yeah.
Good to know.
So maybe it's something with the field goal unit as well. They got this might be a situation where you go to the fourth quarter and I know Kirk likes to, if you're close, there's the temptation to just play it safe to keep it close. But sometimes you've got to be able to go out there and throw the final punch, Don.
Yep. Yeah.
And that's why I go back to what I said earlier. I hope Kirk is willing in a close game against Ohio State to let Tim maybe throw that final punch on offense, but maybe it is on special teams with LeVar.
Let me use that old boxing analogy. If it's a 15-round fight, obviously as an underdog, the best chance you have to win the fight is to survive a lot of those rounds that precede the 15th round. Maybe as the fight winds down, obviously at some point, you better throw a punch, and if they call it a lucky punch, I'm okay with them calling that as long as it landed. So that's what you got to do is hang around. Same way in wrestling. You see it in wrestling sometimes. One wrestler is clearly better than the other one, but he doesn't have that killer instinct. And now he lets the other guy hang around, then the guy gets lucky at the end, and sometimes that results in an upset. So it's entirely possible that a football game can play out much as a wrestling match or much like a boxing match.
Yeah. Coach, what do you think of the idea that I threw out there about Ostringa getting some more targets? Since, he's kind of, I don't want to say undervalued. I don't mean undervalued, but like under watched, because he's in Luke Lachey's shadow, kind of. Luke's the star tight end. And Ostringa, I think, has all the qualities to be very, very good. So why not give it a try to, because a lot of this is going to be about strategy, right? Ohio State's got the better athletes. Everybody knows it. That's not a secret. So we need to be sneaky and choosy and strategic here.
Yeah, to be honest with you, Erica, I'm not so sure that Ostringa hadn't been targeted almost as much as our starter. Believe me, that's our number one personnel group is 12. So there are two tight ends out there a lot. And I don't know that for a fact, but I'm willing to bet you that the targeting is not very different from one to the other. So it's not so much target a specific player, it's to be sure to target the one based on scheme that has a chance to be open.
Right.
And of course, from a quarterback standpoint, make the proper read and continually get it to the guy that deserves the ball the most.
Yeah.
By that I mean he's open. It's not a risky throw. To brag on Cade for a minute last week, one thing I made a comment after the game. I said, one thing I liked about Cade today, a Minnesota Gopher never touched the football. I don't believe a Gopher ever touched the ball a pass.
No, they didn't. No, they
So
didn't. Not that I remember.
It all starts with protecting the ball.
Yeah.
And Cade did a good job of that.
And the O-line helping to protect him, too.
They've shared the ball around between not just Estringa, Lachey, also Hayden Large. And here's a guy who has had some action. I remember a year ago at Wisconsin, a tight end who caught a deep ball, Don. Do you remember who that was?
Can't remember.
That was Zach Ortworth. And he's a guy we haven't really seen here last couple of weeks. And I don't know if I kind of thought about that during the last game. I thought, is Zach hurt? Because he was playing a lot games, I think games 1 and 2.
Correct me if I'm wrong. He had a big play in a game 1 or game 2.
Yes, he did.
Play. Yeah.
So I wonder if he's dinged up. Maybe we'll get an update on him. Probably not. We probably won't hear anything. But he's a guy who's proven he can maybe be a deep threat as a tight end.
Yeah.
Yep, he runs well.
And one other thing I wanted to ask, too, going back to the cornerback, I meant to bring it up when we were talking about cornerbacks. Didn't Castro play cornerback? Like, I know he's playing cash mostly now, but didn't he start out as – no, he wasn't a corner?
Safety.
I don't think – that's not his strength.
Okay.
Yes, safety.
Okay. Why did I think corner? I must have been thinking of someone else. That's okay.
Well, they call them, the Pro Football Focus likes to rate these slot corners. But, Don, would you consider him to be a slot corner? I don't even like that term because –
No, that would suggest that you can also play outside.
Correct. That's what I think of when I think of a cornerback, right?
Right.
So I think the better description of what he does is he's good at being able to
pursue the ball
in space, especially for a guy his size who's as good coming down, coming hard, making a big play in the backfield. I think he's more versatile maybe than your average cover guy inside, if that makes sense. Is that a fair way to put it, Don?
Yeah, his skills are better suited as an inside defender, as a safety, not a corner.
Okay. I don't know where I got that then. It must have been, like you said, someone must have labeled him as that at some point, and he's not. So
yeah, it's out there.
I want to see him make a pick 6 this game. I would like to see that. We need that. I want a pick 6 this game from either Castro or anybody back there, really, in the defense, And I just hope that Parker has kind of, I know he will prepare them. Hopefully, he realizes, I think part of the reason he came off, in my opinion, is a little defensive during those press conferences last week is because he knows that they're not a bad defense by any stretch, but they're not up to the Iowa expectations, right, that we've come accustomed to. So I think he probably gave them, a talking to and stuff like that. And I think we're going to see a better defensive unit out there. So, and I want to see Brian Allen as well go out there and dominate again, because I love that play he made where he totally pushed back that play. I can't even remember which game it was. Was it Troy? I want to say it was Troy, right?
Yeah.
He totally pushed back that one. I think it was the quarterback. Like, I don't know how many yards. That was beautiful. That was just beautiful. I loved it. Such dominance.
He's got some upside, Erica. You're right.
Definitely. Well, thank you very much, guys. I'll stop rambling on. I'm sure other people have stuff to say, but as always, a pleasure. And Don, if you can throw in a Hayden Fry story at the end, that would be awesome.
Thanks, Erica. Appreciate the call as always. Okay, so a couple things. I want to kind of go quick fire before we go to our final caller, Don. So let's be kind of quick on these comments. Tanner wants to know percentage chance you give. I guess I kind of already asked you this, but he says if we run Caleb for at least 150 yards and hold Ohio State to 24 points, I'd give Iowa about a 50% chance if they do that.
I'd say it's at least 50-50 at that point.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Good question. Tacoon, Tim Lester seemed to emphasize the importance of this bye week, how they can use it to work on the pass. I've been saying that for weeks, Don. What have I said? October. Okay. Yep. Do you think Lester will show some looks we've not seen at all so far this year against the Buckeyes?
Absolutely.
All right. That's the answer we wanted to hear, Don. David says, Coach P, with OSU's receivers, do you think Iowa will play any dime or stay with nickel?
Good question. I'm not as familiar with their personnel groups. I really haven't studied their offense that much. I don't think you're going to see any dime unless they happen to go maybe 10 personnel. 10 personnel is one back, no tight ends. In other words, 4 wideouts.
Yeah.
Maybe third and extra long. If they go 10 personnel, maybe you might see some dime. Because one thing that we like to do, in long yards, we like to go 2-man, 500 man, right? Man up on all the receivers and have two high safeties in the back end as security. Let's face it, they put 4 wideouts on the field. One way to counter that, if you're going to play 500 man, is put in 6 DBs, 2 safeties playing deep, and your 4 cover guys manned up underneath. And that only leaves one spot for a linebacker to man up or combo on the remaining back in the backfield.
Coach P, Doc P says, Coach, who was the wide receiver that caught the long pass in '83 to beat Ohio State?
In '83, take me back to the game. I'm trying to think. '83.
I couldn't tell you. Is that the game that Mark was referring to earlier with?
No, that was the Mark Cook game. That was in the late '80s.
Okay. All right. Well, somebody might, Mark, if he's still here, Mark might be able to tell us, but that's a very specific question.
Mark knows better than I do. I can't remember the '83 game that well. Did we play here or there?
I have no idea, Don.
I'm not sure.
Voice of College Football, that's Mark. He wants to know, Don, do you remember the 1990 game in Iowa City? Ohio State won on the final play, 20-27 on Bobby Olive's catch in the back of the end zone.
I do remember that game because, correct me if I'm wrong, he's one of my favorite players, one of my favorite people that I ever recruited, a guy by the name of Merton Hanks. Merton was a great player, as you know, but there was a play at the end of the first half. It was a deep ball that went off Merton. It caromed off Merton's shoulder pad and into the hands of an Ohio State receiver. And then they scored right at the end of the half on a little bit of a fluke play, because normally Merton would make that play, and he's only human. He made so many great plays for us over his career, but there's one that got away. And then at the end of the game, so they scored at the end of either half to make a difference in the game. And we were the better team, but on that day, the better team lost. Sometimes it happens that way. Footballs do take funny hops, and sometimes they hop your way, and sometimes they don't.
Mark says that the 1983 game was an Iowa win 20-14, but he doesn't remember that game. It was in Iowa City, though.
Yeah. Now it's coming back to me, Mark. I do recall, as you remember, 1981, we didn't play Ohio State. And I think, Mark, we ended up tied in the standings, but we simply represented because it had been longer since we'd been at the Rose Bowl. As I recall, that was the criteria. I do know this. We didn't play each other in '82 either. But when '83 rolled around in Kinnick, our guys knew this is a referendum, if you will, on the '81 season, because I think there was a lot of talk by Ohio State players, and maybe not players, but fans certainly. If we would have played Iowa in '81, we would have beaten them. It was really important to our players that in '83, which is the next time we matched up after sharing the title in '81, it's very important for us to win that game, and we did. And we deserve to win it too.
All right. Comment here from Doug. Super chat from Doug. Thank you, Doug. Will you be going to Men's Basketball Media Day? I believe so, Doug. But thank you for reminding me. This time of year, just so locked in on football. But thank you for the super chat. And I need to follow up on that invite. Big Hawkeye Kelvin, Coach Patterson, if you had momentum in the horseshoe, would you play for overtime or trust your team go for a field goal position to try a win in regulation? All depends on clock, right? Field position, all that.
Play for overtime or trust your team to go for a field goal position to try to win it in regulation. I mean, you got to give me some specifics here. You're saying, go ahead.
Well, I was going to say 2009.
Are we tied? Are we down by one? Down by?
No, he's saying go to overtime or go for the win in regulation. The reason that gets brought up, 2009, Iowa was there, and the Rose Bowl was on the line that year.
And we were happy to wait for overtime.
They waited for overtime, and what happened? Freshman quarterback James Vandenberg, who was thrust into that game, played amazing, took a stupid sack in overtime. I just saw James Vandenberg at the Amana Colonies not that long ago. Great memories from that game, but boy, that was a crucial.
I do remember the game, and in other words, the point, looking back at that game, Corey, correct me if I'm wrong, we had more than just a little bit of time with that last possession. There was, a minute and a half left or whatnot.
Yeah. I remember yelling at the television about doing something there, but it is what it is. Flan Squad Gaming. Do you see Iowa winning more likely if we stick with running it like Michigan has used to beat Ohio State? Okay, so basically he's saying you'll run heavy. It's going to have to be just based on situational football, right, Don? You got to be very pointed with when you attack. I don't think it's necessarily like going in saying, well, we have to run the ball 60% of the time, throw it 40. It all is about play to play, right? I mean, some of it's going to be scripted, but a lot of it's going to be feel, and that's why you have a guy like Coach Lester making those shots, those calls.
Well, it's logical that plan A might be if we can run the ball and keep their offense off the field and win the game with a conservative approach. Obviously, that sounds like a great plan. But maybe that's plan A when the game starts. But if we're smart, plan A may not last very long. At some point we might decide, you know what, we're not going to be able to just muscle them all day long and get it done. So we have no choice but to open things up a little bit. And I have a lot of faith in Tim Lester being able to make good decisions with how we adjust to the game situations.
Super chat here. We're going to call this individual LG. I know who you are, though, LG. So thank you. It was nice meeting you at your brother's wedding as well. Thank you for the super chat, sir. And until next time, it'll be a pleasure to have you here once in a while. LG is not a Hawkeye fan per se, but he enjoys following college sports as a whole. So appreciate LG with the super chat. Let's go to our final caller of the day, and it's the one and only Corey. And Corey, you got your Lions shirt on. I'm giving you 5 minutes with Don. Go.
All right. Well, let's dedicate this to Swarm.
Of course. You got the Swarm beer and you got the Lions jacket on. That's great.
Detroit Lions. I got Laporta with a 20-yard reception just a minute ago. Detroit Lions. We're sitting here with Parker Hesse, Nick Neiman, Jack Campbell, Sam Laporta. Who am I missing?
Is Hesse playing? Is Hesse actually playing?
Oh yeah, he comes in and he's fullback. Very and special team. Oh, I guarantee you, Dan Campbell loves Parker Hesse. It's just a thing of beauty. He goes in there and he just moves people, and it's a thing of beauty.
Well, how about this for a stat real quick? Sam Laporta, 4 catches, 53 yards, Don, on 4 targets, and so 4 of 4 there. And then Jack Campbell with 7 tackles, second on the team right now, including a tackle for loss. 6 of those tackles are solo tackles for the former Hawkeye, and Ben Neiman has 2 tackles.
So, Corey, give us the score.
It's
35-27.
Detroit's leading, and they're driving to put it away. But Jack Campbell also had a huge hit on that monster DJ Metcalf to knock the ball loose, which sprung a fumble, and we recovered it, ran it down to the 10-yard line and drove it in to score. So that was a very key play in the game.
A lot of Hawkeyes in this game. Noah Fant also playing. He's got a catch for 16 yards, and former Ohio State receiver we talked about earlier, Jackson Smith and Jigba, with 7 catches in the night for Seattle.
Wow.
Yeah, and Kenneth Walker Jr. is just a menace, along with Tyler Lockett for Seattle. But you talk about trick play. Detroit had a fantastic play. They handed off to a wide receiver like it's going to be a reverse or wide receiver, like a jet sweep. And he's going around the right end. He holds up, and Jared Goff's quarterback leaks into the end zone, and he throws it just over the linebacker. Jared Goff's 1 for 1 on targets for 1 catch for a touchdown. And I think he's 15 for 15 on passing.
Well, Corey, if you think about it, you've heard me talk about man coverage. What's one way to beat a man coverage? How about throwing the ball to a guy that has no man assigned to him? That would be the quarterback.
Well, you're right. Jared Goff is 17 of 17 for 284 yards and a touchdown today, Don.
Wow. And they're losing?
No, they're winning. They're
they're winning.
35-27.
Okay.
And they're driving. They're down on the 8-yard line. And let's see if they throw it. Yeah. They're going to give it to him. Touchdown to Amon-Ra St. Brown. Anyway, I'm going to try to gather my thoughts here. Don, could you foresee the utilization of our tight ends on some sort of a crossing route, or our wide receivers like a Jacob Gill, and get some sort of a crossing route? Would that help to beat that man coverage if they roll that way with their elite defensive backs?
Well, you've always heard announcers talking about rub routes or pick passes. Sure. All you do, you simply have receivers mesh each other, and the man defender, of course, he's got a hard decision to make. Does he try to play underneath the receiver that's in his way or not? And it's an effective thing to do. Of course, you got to be a good actor. What you can't do is gather yourself to anticipate the contact. Ideally, the rub route is a guy that's positioned so that he's looking strictly at the quarterback with his hands up in anticipation of a throw. At that point, he's a good rub route.
Because it just seems like chances are we don't have the advantage as far as speed goes. And so we're going to have to beat them with good routes. And, are we going to burn them over the top for something deep? It's possible, but I'm not seeing that. But I am seeing, like you're talking about, I think. And then, I think our tight ends give us an advantage.
Yeah. Corey, I've always said this. If you look long enough and hard enough, you'll find something that's available to you down the field. I can honestly say, just about every game I've coached, if you look long enough and hard enough, you'll find something. Then you got to consider all formations, and you got to consider all down and distances. Maybe there's a particular formation in this particular down and distance situation. It's exactly what you want. It's your best opportunity downfield, and you should have it in your offense. That's how you beat people over the top, is you consider all possibilities. It's time consuming, but it's what you got to do.
And Don, would you say that with, if we can get that run game rolling, would you foresee Lester rolling with like a play action and try to draw those defenders up and try to burn them over the top? I mean,
sure, we'd be foolish if we didn't try.
With the Jacob Gill or
and Tim Lester's not foolish.
Caleb, be nice to give him a dose of Caleb Brown and just give it right back.
Do you think Caleb Brown might be motivated for this game? Oh, I don't know. How about Caleb Johnson? Well, yeah, Hamilton, Ohio. I've been to Hamilton High School.
And
I've been to his high school.
And Higgins, he's a not far from there. Okay, and then lastly, I guess my question would be, I want you to turncoat now and go with, I want you to be the defensive coordinator and be Phil Parker. What's the best way? You got a young Ohio State quarterback with some speedster receivers. Is it better to pressure the quarterback up front, throwing some blitzes at him?
I don't believe Will Howard's very young. Corey, correct me if I'm wrong.
Oh, I'm sorry. He's a young new transfer, but he's new to the team. I mean, they don't have perfect chemistry. So I'm saying they're not probably perfectly in sync. And the reason I suspect that is I did see some miscommunication. Not on this game. I think it was Appalachian. Who'd they play? They didn't play Appalachian.
Marshall.
Thank you. There's a couple miscommunications there. So I think there's a potential there. But, I mean, when you have a mismatch where they've got speed on you at receiver over our DBs, potentially, is it better to pressure the quarterback and shorten up the time that those receivers have to separate?
Well, there is a thing called a zone blitz. Now you're actually more saying you're bringing rushers that don't normally rush, and yet you're still playing zone in behind it. Not a big part of what we've done. It could be incorporated more. So that might bother any team for that to happen. Zone blitz is kind of fallen out of favor a little bit in college football. You don't see as much of it as you once did. I think back to John Haycock when he was the head coach at Youngstown. They were really, really good with zone blitz. But I don't think they do it as much anymore. So maybe in John Haycock's mind, it's not as applicable as it once was. But the bottom line, the best way to get pressure on a quarterback is to put him in 3rd and long. Because now our rushers up front don't have to worry so much about run. And that's when you're going to see more sacks in general on 3rd and long than you will on any other down and distance. Simply because our guys, as Coach Fry used to say, our guys are pinning their ears back. I guess that's supposed to be a little bit like a dog chasing a squirrel or something. When a dog's going to run fast, he's got to pin his ears back, right? So that's what our players did when they pass rush. They pinned their ears back and they went after that QB without regard to run.
Yeah. By the way, Jared Goff just got another touchdown, 18 of 18 now. 2 touchdowns. They got 42 points on the board. Corey, any final words before I let you slide?
What is Don going to do if Iowa wins? Are we going to get a cowboy hat? What are we going to get out of him? We need something, Don, something special.
You're going to get a lot of pleased response out of me after the game, that's for sure. Because I know it's not easy to go to the shoe and win. But it's doable. We've done it before. We can do it again.
I think we're going to have to make the Big Ten championship for Don to bring the sequin cowboy hat back out. So
can we get a 4-hour show commitment out of Corey if they beat Ohio State in the horseshoe?
If they beat Ohio State, there's a chance I'm live for 4 hours. I'm not going to commit Dirk. I almost called you. Why did I almost call you Dirk? I was mixing Don and Kirk. I can't promise Don is going to do that, but Corey, we'll talk to you after the game Saturday, hopefully talking about a miracle win.
All right. Go Hawks.
Thanks, Corey. Go Hawks, absolutely. And LG's correcting me in the chat. He says, actually, he is a Hawkeye fan, so my mistake. Thank you for the super chat nonetheless, and appreciate you being here, sir. Erica, with the final super chat of the night, give the people what they want. Off-season show with Coach and Mark taking a trip down memory lane with extra Hayden Fry stories, please. We'll have to arrange that, Don. Erica wants more of you and Mark Rogers together, so we can do that. And we'll leave this final comment up here as we sign off. Tom Nickel, go Hawks always. Thank you for being here, Tom. Don, Erica wanted a Hayden Fry story. Can you give us a Hayden Fry story? And then I'm going to ask you what final thoughts on the big game on Saturday.
Well, I do recall, I think it was our first trip to Minnesota. I think it was 1980. I think we lost to them down here, I believe. I could be wrong about year one, but I think we lost to them down here. But I do remember playing up there. We didn't know it, but after the game, after we beat them, I believe 1980, we did win that game. Coach Fry shows up, not in his usual post-game outfit. It's not the coaching gear that he was wearing during the game. He shows up with a straw hat and a pair of overalls and a flannel shirt because they've always, they thought they were the Twin Cities and they had all this big city atmosphere that we didn't have down in the state of Iowa. So Hayden had some fun with that. He showed up looking a little bit like Mr. Green Jeans. Was that his name on the TV show? What was that called? Howdy Doody, maybe?
I was going to say Yankee Doodle, but yeah.
Yeah. Hayden showed up dressed like a typical farmer in the state of Iowa, and he had fun with that. And it was easy to feel good about that game, especially when you saw Coach Fry taking advantage of the fact that the Gophers maybe were looking down their noses and a bunch of hayseeds from Iowa.
Well, Don, any final thoughts on this one? We went through a lot. We're going to cut some of this up and release it later this week. I'll be releasing my personal preview tomorrow on the channel. We're recording this live on Monday, September 30th, recorded preview for myself on the channel on the 1st. But any final words on the matchup against Ohio State and maybe some keys to victory?
Well, my priorities for the game, Ohio State is so capable. They love to hit you over the head with explosive plays. Now, part of their problem on Saturday, Iowa happens to be really, really good based on an entire season a year ago in preventing big plays. So it's going to be strength against strength. We're the best team in the Big Ten last year in preventing big plays. And I don't doubt that at the end of this year, Ohio State will be probably number one in making big plays. So strength against strength on that side of the ball. And in that regard, that's going to be a classic matchup to watch. Our defense versus a very explosive Ohio State offense. Maybe the difference in terms of advantages, we had 2 weeks to get ready for them, and they've had not as much time in preparing for us. That's one. Beyond that, I think I told the story. When I looked at an entire season of Big Ten play, turnover margin, edge on turnover margin, did not produce the usual low 80% winning percentage. This past year, it was only 72%. And I remember thinking, why did it tail off so much? If I had to give one reason for why it dropped, it was because of Ohio State. Ohio State was -1, I believe, in maybe as many as 4 games, and yet they still won the game. So the message there to our team, I hope, is +1 on our part might not be good enough. Let's strive to be +2 or +3. +2 in the Big Ten last year was 83% win. +3, which is hard to come by, was in fact 100% win. I think we can beat Ohio State with a +2 turnover margin. I'm not sure we can get it done with +1. So it's imperative that we generate turnovers and protect the ball on offense, and of course, run the ball, keep that explosive offense off the field, and be able to defend against explosive plays on the part of their offense. And it's not just passing game, it's running game also. That's the challenge, a huge challenge, but one I know that our players embrace. Just think of it this way. They've worked long and hard for this opportunity. They knew even before the season started, the odds are our best chance to make national news. There's only one team on our schedule that if we can pull it off, everybody's going to know about it in the entire country, and that's to knock off what was logically going to be a very highly ranked and very deserving Ohio State football team. That's where we are. Our guys are focused on getting that done. It's a tall order, but I would not want to bet against them.
Mark says, Captain Kangaroo.
Captain Kangaroo, yes.
All right, folks. For Coach Don Patterson, I'm Corey Bratta from the Hawkeye of the Storm. We'll see you after the game. It's a 2:30 p.m. Central Time kick on CBS between the Hawkeyes and the Buckeyes from Columbus. Live Iowa postgame with Coach Don Patterson immediately following the game. We'll talk to you Saturday.